And joining us now in the nation's capital, Diane Pacom, professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the University of Ottawa. And it's good to have you on our program again, madame. Comment allez-vous ce soir?
Thank you, Monsieur Pacom. How are you? I'm
Just
wonderful.
Great.
Thank
Just
you.
great, thank you. Well, I think I have this right. You're not born here, right? You're born in Egypt and you came to Canada later in life?
Yes, I lived in Switzerland actually during my teenage years, and then I came to Canada. So when I came to Canada, I had just finished my undergraduate work in sociology at the University of Lausanne. And the interesting thing is that when I arrived in Canada, I didn't have a clue about what the Canadian identity was.
You didn't know that we were a kinder, gentler people, eh?
That I learned as soon as I came to Montreal. But before that, I was constantly going to the embassy in Bern and trying to find, some literature about Canada. And as a sociologist, obviously, I was trying to understand better the national identity, the culture. But unfortunately, the brochures, they were only showing mountains and beavers and lakes. So
well, we do have all that here.
Of course, but coming from Europe where they always highlight the history and the culture and the museums and the art, I was really taken aback when I came to Montreal and I realized that there was this society that was so particular and so urban. I was really stunned because there was no relationship with what they gave me in the embassy, so the brand was not that great back then.
Well, let me follow up on that because I'd like to know from your point of view as a sociologist as opposed to as an immigrant who looked at brochures, how do you think as a sociologist that national identities are formed by countries?
Well, it's one of the elementary tasks of the social institutions like the education, the family, culture, or the art, to constantly integrate people. Like even people who were born here, they constantly have to be reminded of who they are. Especially in a society which is so individualistic like today's society, there has to be an element that produces togetherness and solidarity. Like we are members of a family, yes, we are specific individuals, but we are also members of this larger reality which is our society. Therefore, I believe that the school system has to do that. It's part of the school system. First of all, like one of the most important things is the language. What language do we speak in this particular society? Then what are the values? Like obviously you spoke earlier about us being kind and being compassionate and being the champions of civil rights. This is something that is learned in schools through the books, through the readings, through the teachings of the professors. The other thing which is also very interesting is that we have to share common perspectives about the future. And one of the very important things also about identity is to share a past, a common past. So memory, the collective memory is very important in creating an identity. And the cultural identity, the national identity are linked. Like we have to be obviously comfortable with the values that we share. Not all of us, because there are always people who live in, in the margins of the society. But we have to be able to feel comfortable about being who we are,
Now, how does a country, I don't want to say that it doesn't like its identity, but if a country wanted to change its identity, how does it change it?
Well, again, identities are constantly changing. We have the impression that identity is a stable situation. It's a work in progress because a national identity which is functional has to be flexible. For instance, in today's reality, we speak a lot about multiculturalism. I'd rather speak about interculturalism, but this is another topic. But multiculturalism. So we are a society that is always integrating new people with their national identities which are totally different than ours. So therefore, we have to be able to adapt and give to these newcomers, being immigrants or being also the younger generations. Like we have always the new recruits that come in society, our kids, our grandchildren, who have to also share with us this identity, but who also can work on the identity. So you see, there has to be a flexibility. And I see, for instance, artists, art art, literature, cinema, music, dance, media, as being responsible for changing or participating to the social change concerning the common identity, the values, and so on and so forth. So it's a collective project. It cannot come from one space into particular, and we have constantly to count on our institutions. As I said, the universities, the families, churches.
Let me jump in there.
Whoever, yes.
Let me jump in there because one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the program is that a number of people have pointed out that when Stephen Harper went to Davos, he seemed to be lecturing the Europeans on how great we were and how our fiscal house was much more in order than theirs was, and some observe that that's a very un-Canadian thing to do. And I want to take you back a year, stand by, because I want to take you back to a year ago.
Yes.
There was a World Junior Hockey Championship that was played in upstate New York, in Western New York, Buffalo. And here's how the Buffalo News wrote about what they saw the Canadians at those tournaments doing. He wrote, "It is a good thing that the World Junior Hockey Tournament did not last any longer. Another week and we might have had a border war. Even as it was, I think we saw a different side of the normally placid, polite, patient, good neighbors that we thought we knew. Buffalo was invaded by a sea of red. The tide has receded, leaving behind some hard feelings, shattered stereotypes, and an aftertaste as bad as the backwash from a warm Molson. Whatever happened to the polite, humble, rule-respecting folks we thought we knew? Where were the civic-minded citizens who dutifully wait at the street corner when the traffic light is red, even when no cars are coming? Wherever you are, we want you back." So that's how Don Esmond and the Buffalo News reported it, and I wonder whether you see evidence that that way we thought of ourselves is changing.
Well, actually, I think that our neighbors, especially from Buffalo, didn't know us very well, because the Canadian society is on one. Obviously, if you compare it to the American society, and this is one thing that was a little bit puzzling to me when I came to Canada. Everybody was telling me we're not Americans. So what are Canadians? Not Americans. So it's interesting because the Americans have constructed this identity about Canadians as being, you know, saintly and people who are very timid and so on and so forth, but they don't know our dark side. Like we have a dark side, and this dark side expresses itself especially when it comes to sports. Like Canada has been identified as a place that has, you know, the legends, our heroes, our mythical figures are related to hockey in particular. So hockey, you cannot touch hockey when it comes to Canada. Like it goes above and beyond. I think even maybe soccer games in some Mediterranean countries come close. But I remember when I was in Montreal, I lived across the street from the Forum for 5 years. And the first time I witnessed the Stanley Cup, that was back then when the Canadiens used to win all the time, I didn't know what was happening. I honestly thought that there was a revolution, that Quebec was separating, because my professors were all fathers of the Quiet Revolution. And then, you know, so finally I realized that in society, which I believe the Canadian identity still remains like a very honorable identity, like people, they negotiate, they don't fight, our streets are still very clean and so on and so forth. But there is always this dark side that comes out in moments where our national honor is shattered if we lose a game or so on and so on and so forth.
Well, let me follow up on that. Yeah, because you know what, the March issue of the Walrus magazine, which will be on, if it isn't already, it's on newsstands soon.
I've seen it, yeah.
You know the one we're talking about here. We're showing it right now.
Yes, I've seen it, yeah.
Yes, That Time We Beat the Americans, A Citizen's Guide to the War of 1812, and there's Uncle Sam with a big black eye, courtesy of, I guess technically we weren't Canada yet, but courtesy of the British North Americans who were here running the show at that time. I want to know what you make of this newfound chest thumping that we're doing, that we, you know, we're going to go through, I guess, the 200th anniversary of we beat those guys, and aren't we great? What do you make of all that?
Yes. Well, I think Canada is trying to rebrand its identity, and I think it's something that has to be done every now and then. And with a conservative government like we're having, it goes without saying that the national pride and conservatism and the past are elements which have to be reactivated in many ways. So this 1812 anniversary, I think, will be an identity building event, especially under this government, because we will have to find, you know, our memory. Now, if you allow me, I wanted to stress something. Young people today, unfortunately, they live in a society which has lost its history. Like history is not something which is very important. The past is not something which is very important. The kids today live in the present and somehow in the future. So it will be, I believe, for the conservative government, and you know, we'll see what the effects of this are going to be, a time and a space to revamp the mythical moments, like the narrative of our history as a society. And I mean, we still have to see how it's going to be staged and so on. But I'm not surprised that they're doing such a big fuss about 1812, because it's one of the heroic moments. And also Canada, in many ways, is trying to open up. You know, we live in a globalized world, so therefore we have to be able to show who we are. People know that we're kind, but we have also to add a little bit more, you know, aspects to our Canadian reality. And
but you know, some people will say it is typically Canadian for Canada to get out there and show off about the fact that it fought the Americans to a tie 200 years ago. That war was a tie.
Yes.
I'm not sure that we won. It was a tie.
Well,
and
yes,
you know, there we go, celebrating something typically Canadian, a tie. You find that weird?
You know, and weird? No, I think, as you said, it's one of the glorious moments of Canada. It was, again, at a political level. It's a different state of affairs. But when you come to down to sociological aspects and cultural aspects, every society needs to have a founding narrative, you know, even in ancient Greece they did that, you know. It's just when is the moment that we became who we are.
Okay, so that was maybe one of them for us, but yes. My hunch is they don't feel the same way in Quebec about it, do they?
Oh, no, well, my God, there is no comparison. I'm flabbergasted, you know, how these two societies are so different and in different stages of their development. I studied at the University of Montreal, and I work within the Francophone world, and their identity is like a religion for them. Like, they're constantly revisiting the past, and I'm amazed to see how the younger generations in Quebec, they take pride in the past. There is even a group called Mes Aïeux, which means my ancestors, and they take pride in the coureurs de bois and the mythological figures of Quebec folklore.
Or will they take pride in the War of 1812 and the remembrances around that?
Of course not. I don't think so.
No.
I don't think I think they're quite indifferent about it at this point, because for them it's not part of their history. So this is the interesting thing that happened in the last 30 or 40 years in Quebec, is that culturally and sociologically they live in a totally different social imaginary, and it's puzzling, because we honestly, like, I live between the two. I'm in between the two solitudes, you know, as they used to call them, and I see, like, the younger generations, because I usually study youth a lot. You know, I'm very interested in youth culture. How the Canadian youth culture is still very close to the American culture, like Justin Bieber and Bublé and all these people. And yet in Quebec, there is this whole different reality, like the artists, like the writers. Just look at the Cirque du Soleil, which became, I think, one of the major Canadian identity ambassadors. You know, people are impressed when they see the Cirque du Soleil. They didn't expect Canada to produce the Cirque du Soleil, but they forget that this was a production of Quebec, where their identity is always, you know, a topic of interest and of concern.
Madame Pacom, in our last minute here, how much do you think of this new, bolder, prouder, more nationalistic country do we attribute to the fact that Stephen Harper is the Prime Minister?
A lot, a lot. I think conservative governments usually put the emphasis on nationalism. They try to create a glue between the different communities. We live in a very fragmented society, let us not forget that. So I think that as long as this government is going to be there, we're going to tend to glorify the past and try to borrow in the past example, paradigms, and values for our today's society. How is this going to be integrated? Well, we should wait another year and we'll see.
On verra, as you say.
On verra. Qui vivra, verra.
It's terrific to have you on our program again. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine fois.
Merci.
That's Diane Pacom, University of Ottawa.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.